Let's look at the SEC East. We're doing a lot of looks, post-spring nature at some of the different conferences and different divisions in college football. And the East is interesting because it's down. That's why. And it's been down for a while. And it's getting old, and I would love to see this change. So let's just start this by looking at the standings last year. Georgia ran away with it, Tennessee second, and South Carolina had another surprisingly good year. If it's not Georgia this year, Georgia's the overwhelming favorite. If it's not Georgia, who would it be? How would this happen? I want to remind you guys, if you're not familiar with the odds market and how things are stacking up this year, sometimes you have a favorite, then you have a solid second tier, right? In the SEC East, that is not the case, at least in the odds market. Now, odds mean nothing once you kick the ball off, but this is all we have to go on right now. So Georgia's over-under preseason win total is 11. Tennessee's is 9. And then I want you to listen to this. The next closest team is Kentucky at 6.5. Missouri, 6.5. South Carolina, 6. Florida, 5.5. And Vandy, 3.5. For the record, Vandy over 3.5 is one of the best bets in the country. If you wanted to know who the worst team, keep this graphic up, Colin. If you want to know who the worst team is, odds-wise, in the SEC West, it would be Mississippi State. And you could slot Mississippi State right there if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on podcast, there are 5 teams in the East that have worse odds than the worst team preseason in the West. So that's gross. That is a gigantic ankle weight, although it's not the way it works necessarily because it just means the net result is Georgia has a very, very easy schedule by SEC standards. But if it's not Georgia, I would assume Tennessee. I would be very, very surprised, frankly, if any of those other teams made a run. But what's interesting with Tennessee is that game's not until later in the year, as we just talked about a little while ago. What's interesting with Tennessee is there are going to be some folks doubting them that also talked last year about the system. Now, follow me here because I want you to be ahead of the curve on this, and I don't want you to fall into this trap. There's this group of people that watched Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt and those players start to shine last year, and what did they do? They tried to pour water on the fire, and they tried to say, oh, they're just system players, though. Oh, Heupel's system does that. Those same people, once those players walk out the door, are going to look you in the eye and say, well, Heupel's system's not going to work. It lost too many players. What? Is this not a little hypocritical? It's either a system thing or it's a players thing. You can't tell me the players are irrelevant because of the system and then tell me the system's not going to work because they lost players. It's going to happen. We're approaching preview magazine season. It's going to happen. I just want you to be ready for that. Tennessee returns 57% offensive production this year. That is 96th in the country. Or in FBS. So, yeah, you can doubt them. That's fine. That's healthy. But if it's not Georgia over there, it probably would be Tennessee. Now, what is that picture for Georgia? Well, if you checked out for spring, looks like Carson Beck's going to be the starting quarterback. I just want to remind you about Georgia. They're like one of 2, maybe 3 teams in the country where everything you've learned about this sport, you just throw it out the window. Ignore conventional wisdom. It doesn't matter that they're 80th in returning production. It doesn't matter they're 109th in returning offensive production. They're just going to be good because the guys they have who haven't played are better than 98% of the guys out there elsewhere who have played. So it's the same thing we've had with Bama for a long time. Clemson had this for a minute. Ohio State sometimes has this. I imagine Southern Cal under Lincoln Riley is going to end up having this offensively. Michigan is this in some ways. So they had 7 first-rounders lost on defense over the past 2 years. They had 13 players drafted off that defense over the past 2 years. Yeah, I would understand if you looked at that and said, boy, can you have that kind of attrition defensively and not fall off at least somewhat? And the answer is probably no. You probably can't have that attrition and maintain the exact same level. But they are so deep and they are so good with guys you've never heard of unless you really follow recruiting hardcore. You'll know their names this year. So a lot of this stuff that is really going to be eye-catching, especially if you're looking for a glimmer of hope that they're going to fall off this year. Some of those stats, I'm telling you, fool's gold. If you're looking at it, you're going to have to beat them. They're probably not going to implode on themselves. You're going to have to beat them. Elsewhere in the East, though, out of the group of teams that's in like the 6 or 6.5 win range, you know what caught my eye? It wasn't Kentucky. South Carolina catches my eye. Their over-under preseason win total is 6. Now, I know why it's down there. It's always the same thing. It's their schedule. They play 5 games versus teams with preseason win totals of 8.5 or better. Or, I mean, the schedule's tougher than that in the country. So, again, it's college football. Strength of schedule matters a great deal. You are not always what your record says you are because the quality of team tied to a record in a lot of cases has to do with who you've played. They're 102nd in returning production this year. That's going to be the headline grabber. To me, the biggest factor on this team is Spencer Rattler back at quarterback for another year, and the constant talk they've had out of that program about how valuable it is for him to have come from a much more simplistic system at Oklahoma to a much more complex system at South Carolina and needing 2 years to fully digest it. Sometimes that's just speak. Sometimes player speak, I guess you would call it. I think it's valid there. You got to have the weapons to throw to. You got to have the offensive line to block for you. Yes, we understand how football works, but 6 is a low number. They've had 2 years in a row, a number set too low for them. Will this be 3 years in a row? If I had to bet South Carolina right now, I'd bet over. Who's the ambush candidate? I always have fun with this. Missouri's the ambush candidate in the SEC East. I already talked about them a little bit. You need to keep an eye on Missouri. They lost 4 games last year by 1 possession. Their over-under preseason is 6.5 wins this year. They're number 9 in returning production. They are top 25 returning production offensively and defensively. They went 6-6 last year, 4 really close losses. Here's where the ambush portion comes in. They almost beat Georgia last year. They've got a bye before they play Georgia this year. And Tennessee plays Georgia right after Missouri this year. So they catch Tennessee in the look-ahead spot. They catch Georgia as they're rested. They are also one of the teams that hired a new offensive coordinator. I'm excited to see how this works out. They hired the guy from Fresno, had the top Mountain West Conference offense out there last year, and Missouri did not. Missouri was 88th in points per game last year offensively and still had some really close losses. So they were 6-6, really close to being 9-3, really close to beating the eventual national champ. I mean, that was an ugly game. That was one where Georgia's down 2 possessions, I believe it was, in the fourth quarter before they ended up coming back to win. Kentucky, it's all about Devin Leary. For those of you who just had your mind blown by the transfer portal, Devin Leary was one of those quarterbacks who was on the move. He went from NC State to Kentucky. So Will Levis out the door. They've got a guy with proven production that came in there. Let's see how it works out. Vanderbilt, one of 2 teams in the league with a returning head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and quarterback. The other one, LSU. And Florida, it's another program relying on a transfer quarterback in Graham Mertz. They are 107th in returning production. Their over-under is 5.5. Florida with an over-under of below bowl-eligible standards. Unbelievable. But that is a snapshot of the SEC East. We've got a lot of time to talk about that.